Good evening and welcome. This is the April 26, 2023 public hearing of the Land Use Commission. The City Code directs this body to hear applications for map and text amendments, special uses including plan developments, zoning relief, and appeals from decisions of the zoning administrator, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term planning goals and objectives. Depending on the type of matter, this commission will either make a final determination or a recommendation to City Council. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Aravallo.
Here.
Commissioner Halleck. Commissioner Hugo.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson is absent. Commissioner Lindwall is absent. Commissioner Miranchev.
Here.
Commissioner Pucktell is absent. Commissioner Westerberg.
Here.
Chair Rogers.
Present. So with 6 members present, we do have a quorum. Also present tonight from city staff are Planner Katie Ashbaugh. I'm not sure, Mr. Cummings, exactly what is your title? You've never been to one of our meetings before?
I'm the Corporation Counsel for the City
Corporation
of Evanston.
Counsel, okay. Nick Cummings is with us, Zoning Administrator Melissa Klotz, Planning Manager Liz Williams. This is a formal hearing, and there are rules that govern our proceedings. Most importantly, only one person speaks at a time so that all testimony may be accurately recorded. Any testimony is taken under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence, please limit your testimony to the proposal as it relates to the standards contained in the zoning ordinance and the corresponding staff memo. If testifying, state your name and address for the record. Our meetings are audio and video recorded. Please make sure that you're at a microphone when you're asking questions or making statements so that it may be accurately recorded. All proceedings are subject to broadcast at a later date. Any matter not concluded at tonight's hearing will be continued to our next regularly scheduled meeting. We have just one case tonight on the agenda, which is a continuation of 1566 Oak Avenue, and I'm going to ask Corporation Counsel to please read their statement.
Good evening, members of the Land Use Commission. Nicholas Cummings, Corporation Counsel. On November 30th, 2022, the Land Use Commission of the City of Evanston held a hearing on the special use application 22ZMJV-0078. Prior to the hearing on November 29th, 2022, BCH 1555 LLC, then represented by Ice Miller, filed a request for continuance. Evanston City Code 6-3-5-17 mandates that eligible property owners, those owners of property within 500-foot radius of the subject property, who wish to object, be granted one continuance for the purpose of presenting evidence to rebut testimony given by the applicant. On November 30th, 2022, when parties that requested continuances were called, no one stepped up on behalf of BCH 1555 LLC, and the petition for continuance was dismissed. On February 10th, 2023, BCH 1555 LLC filed a verified complaint and motion for injunctive relief in the Circuit Court of Cook County, and the court entered a temporary restraining order halting the process for application 22ZMJV-0078. The city then issued a notice of hearing on the continuance by BCH 1555 LLC for March 8th, 2023. On February 24th, 2023, BCH 1555 LLC filed a motion for accommodation asking the court, among other things, to move the date of the continuance hearing. On March 2nd, 2023, the court entered an order granting BCH 1555 LLC's motion and ordered the continuance to be heard today, April 26, 2023. So we're here for the purpose of the continuance granted by the court, Circuit Court of Cook County, for BCH 1555 LLC to present evidence pursuant to code.
Thank you, Counsel. With that, we do have the continuance that was requested by one of the neighbors, and we will be hearing that this evening. One of the things that our rules do permit is for the chair to grant time to speakers. The chair has decided to grant 20 minutes to the neighbor to present their case. They have also submitted over 350 pages of documentation. I will ask the commissioners to please hold all questions until after the presentation so as not to interrupt, at which time we will then entertain questions from the commissioners to the complainant. And then I will offer an opportunity of 5 minutes of rebuttal time to the applicant. And again, same thing, asking commissioners to please withhold all questions until after their presentation. and then ask the questions at that point. At that point, we will go through our normal deliberative process and render a recommendation to City Council on this matter. At this point, I'm going to ask, I don't know if everybody on the team from both sides was here at the last meeting, so I'm just going to swear everybody in anew and ask you to please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth throughout the course of these proceedings? Thank you. At this point, Mr. Dish, I'm assuming you will be lead?
Good evening, Chairman Rogers and honorable members of the board. Before we get into the testimony, I do want to protest the 20-minute time limit. I think that's unreasonable, and that said, I will ask Monica Forte with Forte & Associates LLC to approach and testify with respect to her response to the Connections for the Homeless special use application.
Good evening, Chair Rogers, members of the commission. Thank you for your time and your consideration this evening. I do want to reiterate Mr. Judish's objection to the time limitation. I don't think it comports with the due process, and I don't think it will be sufficient to allow BCH to present its position. With that being said, I basically am speaking with respect to the elements of the ordinance that Connections needs to establish in its application, and it is our position that they have not. So I will get right to it. So with respect to A, whether the proposed use is a permitted use by the zoning ordinance, it is our position that because the application seeks to operate a rooming house at the Margarita Inn, that is an inappropriate definition to apply to the operations of Connections at the Margarita Inn. A rooming house is defined as a building or portion thereof containing lodging rooms that accommodate more than 3 persons who are not members of the keeper's family, and where lodging, excluding food service, is provided for compensation, whether direct or indirect. The lodging is not provided for compensation, and food service is expressly provided there. On the other hand, a more appropriate designation for the use is transitional shelter, which the ordinance defines as a building or portion thereof in which sleeping accommodations are provided on an emergency basis for temporarily homeless. This description does not define emergency basis, and contrary to arguments made on behalf of Connections previously, this description does not require occupants to leave the facility in 12 to 24 hours. Moreover, the definition of transitional shelter used by the Illinois Department of Human Services under emergency and transitional housing is providing shelter, food, and supportive services for up to 24 months. Connections' proposed use does not comport with a rooming house, much closer to transitional shelter. As such, Connections is required to comply with the standards for a special use as a transitional shelter under Section 6-3-5-11 of the zoning ordinance, which it also does not. B, Connections application fails to show how its proposed use is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the Comprehensive General Plan. The Comprehensive General Plan is the governing land use plan, and the failure of the Connections application to demonstrate that its proposed use is in keeping with that plan militates denial of the application. I'm not going to go through the goals of the Comprehensive General Plan, but again, the failure to even address this, how the proposed use does comport with that plan, I think is fatal to the application. C, Connections' proposed use will cause a negative cumulative effect when its effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect of various special uses of all types on the immediate neighborhood and the effect of the proposed type of special use upon the city as a whole. We have supplied the commission with the Valbridge report, which I was hoping to have addressed by another witness this evening, demonstrates the negative impact on the neighborhood, including the increased police and fire department calls to the Margarita Inn. We've also supplied the commission with the statement of former police chief Richard Eddington, which also demonstrates that police, EMS, and fire calls steeply increased, creating a strain on our critically understaffed police department. Both of these documents demonstrate that the impact of the criminal activity at the Margarita Inn since Connections has operated there is negatively impacting the entire neighborhood. These crimes include battery of a resident who was struck with a brick but discouraged by staff from contacting the police or seeking medical assistance, death by drug overdose, beating of an 11-year-old child so severely that the witness believed the child would be killed, domestic disturbances, rape, throwing someone through a currency exchange window, drug overdose, battery, trespass, and investigation of attempted arson. The continuing criminal conduct at the Margarita Inn has a negative impact on the neighborhood and poses a significant threat to the individuals residing at the Margarita Inn. D, it does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. Again, the Valbridge report that we have provided provides concrete evidence that Connections operations at the Margarita Inn have adversely impacted the value of the neighborhood properties. Property values have significantly declined in the immediate vicinity of the Margarita Inn compared with the marked increase in property values outside the vicinity of the Margarita Inn. In fact, the Valbridge report concludes that there has been a 160% increase in fire EMS calls at the Margarita Inn since March of 2020, and more than a 1,006% increase in police calls. I don't think it can be validly argued that there hasn't been a negative impact on the neighborhood. E, it can be adequately served by public facilities and services. Again, referencing the Valbridge report, the police incident reports, and the statement of former Chief Eddington, the Margarita Inn is the source of the vast majority of emergency calls on the 1500 block of Oak Avenue. The Evanston Police Force is understaffed, and there are numerous other high-needs facilities further straining the ability of the city to support the needs of the Margarita Inn. They have not demonstrated in their application that those needs can be met by the proposed special use. F, it does not cause undue traffic congestion. Again, there are only 10 parking spaces at the Margarita Inn, assuming a staff of even only 6 people and 70 occupants, plus any guests they may have, along with any maintenance staff. 10 parking spaces will be grossly inadequate. And the, again, increased calls for emergency services, which are documented, may stall or impede traffic on and around Oak Avenue. The special use application fails to address this. And then I, it complies with all other applicable regulations of the district in which it is located and other applicable ordinances, except to the extent such regulations have been modified through the planned development process or the grant of a variation. Given the numerous instances of criminal activity at the Margarita Inn, the use constitutes a nuisance under Evanston's own public safety ordinance. Connections' own application demonstrates that the number of crimes occurring at the Margarita Inn, which they state are fewer than 10 in 1 year, identified as Class 1 crimes, demonstrates that this constitutes a nuisance, again, under Evanston's own public safety ordinance. We also state that it is likely it constitutes a public nuisance because it represents the doing of or the failure to do something that injuriously affects the safety, health, or morals of the public, or works some substantial annoyance, inconvenience, or injury to the public. Here, Connections' application has failed to meet the criteria set forth in Evanston's zoning ordinance for a special use. It should therefore be disapproved. I again request that we be granted at least as much time as the applicant was granted at the public hearing on November 30th, and I do believe that our truncation of our time limit is in fact another violation of our due process rights. But thank you.
Next, I'm going to have Mr. Tom Wolf step up, who is president of the Pacific Alliance for Prevention and Recovery. We flew him in yesterday from San Francisco and put him up at a hotel at great expense, so we hope you will hear his testimony.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioner and everyone here on the board. My name is Tom Wolf. I'm a nationally recognized recovery advocate based in San Francisco. I'm also formerly homeless and in recovery from addiction from heroin and fentanyl. 5 years ago, I was sleeping on the streets of the Tenderloin in San Francisco. What brings me to Evanston? Well, we've also been watching. The Margarita Inn issue is actually in the news. And for those of us that are involved in drug policy and homeless policy, we've been paying attention in San Francisco because we have become kind of the epicenter for everything that's going wrong around drugs and homelessness in the entire country. You've seen us a lot in the news lately, I'm sure, and you've probably just heard that our governor just called in the National Guard into San Francisco. Here's the issue. San Francisco practices a low barrier, housing first, harm reduction model. I get it. Most of the country does. But guess what's happening in our low barrier, harm reduction, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing in our city? Overdose deaths. In 2020, 2021, in our SROs, which are low barrier, housing first, supportive housing units, we had 162 overdose deaths. 65% of all of our overdose deaths that happened last month in our city happened inside at a fixed address. We had the flagship store of Whole Foods in San Francisco abruptly shut its doors last month in San Francisco, which made national news. Why did it do that? Because across the street was a low barrier, harm reduction based linkage center that created an open drug scene that led to the actual store literally being shoplifted until they had to shut it down, including overdose deaths happening inside the bathroom and people with meth-induced psychosis causing damage and assaulting employees, and 200 employees lost their jobs as a result. Why does this matter to your community? Because the Margarita Inn is the first domino to go in that direction. If this place continues as a transitional housing shelter without the appropriate services that are focused on recovery, i.e., if you're going to keep it open, you convert it into a therapeutic community that promotes recovery and wellness, not low barrier where they turn a blind eye to drug use, and the proof is in the pudding because you've had at least 3 overdose deaths inside the Margarita Inn. That's unacceptable. That literally casts a pall on your community, and it hurts business in your community. It's going to affect the rents in your community. It's going to affect the tax base in your community. If you don't believe it, start looking around at other cities, especially on the West Coast, that are struggling with this issue right now. As we try to bring more low barrier services, our downtown is still cratering from COVID, and it's not recovering because of all of the death that's actually happening as a result of the drug crisis. Fentanyl is in this community. It's in Chicago, and it's in this community too. And it's only going to continue to get worse. Now, in regard to data, and I'll just speak really briefly on this, around the Housing First model in general, there's a growing chorus of people to stop and review whether or not Housing First and this low barrier model is actually working. HUD released a study, which is in the document that you guys have, which is, where is it? Here it is. Page 4 of this document right here that you guys have in your paperwork, if you would be so kind as to read it at some point, why Housing First and low barrier shelters should be reconsidered. So in the last annual homeless assessment report from HUD, from the federal government, under the current low barrier Housing First model, actually shows that homelessness increased since its inception nationwide by 15%, despite a $200 billion increase in spending. Okay? Also, there was a Harvard study done in 2021 that says, and you've heard this, Housing First keeps people housed after 2 years. Well, what about after 5 years? The number drops to 38%. And after 10 years, it drops to only 12%. Why? Because there's no recovery. There's no treatment. There's no mental health treatment. That's what we need. Just putting someone in in an 80 square foot room that's addicted to fentanyl or meth is actually more harmful for an addict. I know, because I'm in recovery and I've been through it. The majority of the people that are dying from overdose right now that you see in the news, they're not homeless people on the street. They're people living inside. And they're living inside permanent supportive housing. So I just caution all of you to consider this as you move forward to make this decision, to think about the impact and the harms that are going to happen to the community. It's about reducing harms to the community, right? That's what we're all about. Nobody in this room is against housing the homeless. We're all for it. I used to be homeless. I'm for it, right? But you have to be pragmatic, and you really have to give it some serious thought as to the potential impacts it will have on the community as a whole, because guess what? If your tax base dries up and next year San Francisco will be $780 million in the hole, that means a 10% cut to homeless services. And that means more people end up on the street. So I urge you to think about that going forward. There's also some other issues briefly about connections to homelessness, the program that's running it. I've worked for a couple of different NGOs, non-government, nonprofits, and there's always an issue around data transparency. And I just want to remind you that, the Housing Bill of Rights only applies to people experiencing homelessness. It doesn't apply to service providers providing services to the homeless. They still have an obligation to provide all the transparent data, good or bad, not just how many people they've housed, and they can't even do that one right, because one area it says 57% success rate, and on their website they say they have an 80% success rate. So if it's 57%, that means 43% of the people at the Margarita are not, they're ending up back, where do they go? Do they go back to the street and disappear? So how really effective is it? So we really need to think about these things, and thank you all very much for the time, and I yield my time to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf.
At this time, I'd like to have Dr. Lucy Ibrahim come up. Ms. Ibrahim is a member of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology.
Thank you and good evening. I provided a report, and I believe it was submitted to you, but in conclusion, what I'd like to say is, given the nature of psychiatric illness in the homeless population, it's actually it's a grave disservice to the homeless, as well as the neighborhood of the shelter, because what happens is we end up mixing various mental illnesses within the homeless population all under one roof, and all we're providing them is a bed and a roof and for the night, without adequate supervision, security, treatment. The result is that we're actually perpetuating homelessness. We're not actually helping them to recover in any way. We are giving them no incentive to seek treatment or improve their life. Not to mention, due to their psychiatric illness, the violence, the vandalism, assault, and crime within the shelter, as well as outside the shelter in the neighborhood.
Could the Valbridge people come up, please?
At this point, I'm going to just make a statement. I know Mr. DeClark socially. We actually have several friends in common. We've gone out socially, but I do not feel that that colors my involvement in this hearing.
Okay.
Good evening, folks. Given our time constraints, I'll keep my remarks short and in summary fashion. I believe you have already, I'll just simply state my name is Gary DeClark. I head up the Valbridge Property Advisors Chicago office. Valbridge is a national entity. I'm the senior managing director and principal of that Chicago office. I've been in the valuation business for 40 years, in addition to being an appraiser. I'm also a counselor and have various appraisal designations and professional designations. I'm also a licensed broker in the state of Illinois. My CV is included in my document, my report at the tail end. I won't go any further. You can take a look at it as you wish. And so let me proceed here. I've been asked by BHC 1555 LLC to prepare an impact study relative to the Margarita Inn area. An impact study is a study where typically it is looked upon as to whether or not an area is a problematic area or not. In this particular case, and it's been accepted many, many times in courts, there is a procedure by the Appraisal Institute that is commonly referred to as a target control area. Target and control analysis. A target area is an area of study. A control area is away from that area of study. And what we typically do, and what we've done in this instance, is take a look at the Margarita Inn vicinity and looked at transactions that have occurred around it over recent times. And at the same point in time, looked at properties away from that in a control area that are not subject to that analysis or that interaction. Took a look at that with regard to the Margarita Inn. In addition to that, we took a look at 3 other locations and had similar answers to what we found in the Margarita Inn scenario. We looked at the 607 Lake Street, Hilda's. We looked at 901 Maple Avenue. And we also looked at 1406 Chicago Avenue. The 901 Maple being Albany Care, and the other one being Chicago. Greenwood Cafe.
I'm going to extend your time by 5 minutes.
Okay, all right, then I'll move ahead very quickly. In my report, you've got an executive summary of findings commentary. I looked at 3 issues: zoning, real estate impact value, and then crime. All of those are interactive in my view. The observation with regard to zoning is that the zoning, as we know, for the Margarita Inn is R6, General Residence District. This district is composed of apartments, condos, co-ops, museum, and other similar properties. It's bordered by other similar and dissimilar zones: D4, O1, OS, and R5. From looking at the Margarita Inn and looking at the zoning, my conclusion is that the Margarita Inn is not consistent with the immediate uses: apartments, condos, museum, possible future hotel. It's too close to the D4 zoning classification, where neither rooming house nor a transitional shelter are applicable. A review of the most recent comprehensive plan map published this past month. I understand that the comprehensive plan is under construction. Shows no variance in zoning from the official up-to-date zoning map. Current use of the Margarita Inn, in my opinion, is inconsistent with the surrounding uses, as well as inconsistent with that comprehensive plan. Secondly, with regard to the real estate value impact, as we said, we took a look at those 4 locations, and the scenario is to take a look about what's occurring in the Margarita Inn area, that's called the target area, and what's happening away from it, that's the control area. You take a look at property values, and why do we use property values, and particularly residential values? Because you have to take a look at something that is reasonably trackable. The information that we were able to gather came from the Multiple Listing Service and Cook County Assessor's records. We use residential properties, again, because that is the buyer's interaction. The buyer has to take ownership, if you will, and effectively the residential is the mode of measuring utility. It's different than an investment in with an apartment building or a retail center, whatever the case may be. It's more oriented toward return on investment. So we look at residential properties, and it's easier to track residential than it is anything else. If we look at utility, when I say utility, won't necessarily find all single-family homes, all condos, all co-ops. It's in this, we all know Evanston, there's a multiple types of properties nearby, so we look at utility. When I say utility, a person looking at a three-bedroom unit will be looking at a three-bedroom unit here or here or here, as opposed to an individual looking for a three-bedroom unit over here and a one-bedroom unit over here. There's a difference. It can't be bridged. So the utility, the usability of the space is important. That's why we compare threes to threes, twos to twos, ones to ones. In any event, I concluded that the average rate of appreciation for residential real estate properties within the immediate vicinity of the Margarita Inn declined significantly in the 12-month period commencing with the start of the connections for the homeless operation at the Margarita Inn location. More so, as of March 2023, said property values decreased even more significantly when compared to average sale prices within the immediate vicinity of, within immediate vicinity from March 2018, 5 years prior. So we looked at year-over-year analysis and then over a 5-year duration as well. Residential real estate, on converse, increased markedly outside the immediate area, and suggesting that there's a diminution of value for properties surrounding the Margarita Inn. Last thing, I know I'm out of time here. With regard to the last issue, crime is the third issue. Anyone who's buying property, the first two important things you look at when you're buying property from a residential standpoint is schools and crime. The schools are great. Crime not so great. Well, maybe I'll look at somewhere else. At the end of the day is that we FOIA'd a bunch of information and got that supplied to us. And at the end of the day, it clearly stated that there was a gigantic increase in fire and police calls in this area, specifically with regard to the Margarita Inn. And a combination of that suggests that there's a diminution of value in the overall context. So I'm out of time. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Didish, do you have anyone else that you wish to have speak?
I had about 3 or 4 other individuals that were going to speak tonight, yes.
Okay, anybody speaking to property values?
We still have, yes, we have the rebuttal testimony to the Lindbergh report.
Okay, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to address that. That was presented to us in documentation as well. So if you could just hit the highlights on it, please. Yeah, this is the report that came in our email this morning.
My name is Neil Renzi. I've been a real estate appraiser for 50 years, and I've been the president of Renzi & Associates since 1975. I've been engaged by BCH 1555 LLC to prepare a rebuttal report to the Lindbergh report. My findings are as follows. In the Lindbergh report, she states there's no evidence that this special use will interfere with or diminish the value of the property in the neighborhood. It's our opinion that interference and diminished value has occurred due to an increased number of police, fire, and emergency calls, which brings an increased risk to the surrounding area. Second point, the special use is consistent with the Margarita's operations for almost a century as a provider of short-term housing. It's my understanding it's been short-term housing for that period of time, but it's also classified as something beyond a rooming house because of the food service. 3, under the special use, the Margarita will be serving residents of limited means, which is also consistent with the properties of past operations. That's not true. The operation has historically attained residents that were working people, usually in a transitional state, but they were all working and not people of limited means. And 4th, and most important, Lindbergh report says there is no evidence that the values of property surrounding the Margarita have declined as a result of the program that has been operating here since March 2020. I say it's our opinion that diminished value has occurred based on the sufficient and relevant evidence provided by the Valbridge impact study that the target area has appreciated at a lesser rate than the control area.
Do commissioners have questions of any of the presenters? Commissioner Westerberg, you look like you're,
There's a question on the real estate valuation. The area around the Margarita is primarily multifamily. What was your control area like? Was that also multifamily with a mixture of various uses, or was it single family? Can you give us some insight on that?
Sure. We tried to keep the controls and the target areas pretty similar to one another. They're clearly not 100% right on, but there's a mixture of uses in both, and we tried to recognize that. And for the most part, we're looking at non-single-family homes, but condominiums and/or townhouses.
Commissioner Halleck?
Maybe it's for you, I'm not sure. My question is, I'm looking for the title of this long report that we received, just as response to Connections for the Homeless. It's this long letter that, one of the, it goes through the different standards, and one of them is, one of the parts of this is a list of the crimes that have been, criminal activity that's been committed. But what I noticed is that it's, the dates on these are 2020 goes up to 2022. And my question is, we reviewed this project back in November of 22. Is there any, I guess my question is, and there was a lot of criticism, including my own, of the operations of Connections for the Homeless. And I'm wondering if Connections did anything to help this this crime situation, and what is the data? What is the result of whether, if they did anything or not? Do you have any recent data on criminal activity?
The information that we had been provided through FOIA actions is included in the report. Maybe someone else from our side has a further comment on that. I don't.
Yeah, I don't.
Would someone like to address that, or that's a question we can also put to the applicant? Ms. Forte?
Thank you again. What I would say is that the information that I have seen, again, it's through FOIA requests. So, we're kind of limited in what it is we can see. And what I see is the last piece of information that I have goes through November of 2022. It's my understanding that there is still criminal activity that's occurring at the Margarita Inn. I do not have that in front of me to present to the commission, but again, it would be a similar FOIA request. So it's out there, I just don't have it.
Right.
Thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Halim.
I think since the big noise and the lawsuits and the hearings, I think Connection have thinned down the building, and they kept the activities much lower than it used to before. I don't know, after you are going to give them permission to continue, they're going to go back to what it was before, because the density of the building and the crime around the building, and as the drugs and things like this is going to go up. I think that they're scared that the crime, with the level of the crime, they are going to lose them. So I noticed the last 2-3 months activities is less, and the occupancy is much less.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Hello, good evening. My name is Nefret Halim, and throughout this process, I've mostly been kind of the secretary for all the paperwork. And I Unfortunately, most unfortunately, I have to tell you that the amount of crime material that we have was so massive. There are reports probably about 3 weeks ago. It was challenging to figure out what to present. We know that you have limited time, and we just did the best that we could with what we have. But there has been sustained crime until very, very recently at that address and at other addresses that Connections manages. So yes, there is still, and we can provide that to you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Salim. Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Hugo.
The motion that was up for consideration on it back in November of 22 had 17 conditions. Are there any additional conditions that the applicant would like to see in here that would mollify the concerns you have to the point where you would support this project or the request for?
I think the 17 condition was presented here. The neighbors do not agree that any of them enforceable. Connection claim always that the homeless bill of right, they cannot apply any of them. And I think there was a testimony today, which we didn't do it, from the previous chief of police, that he said that every issue comes out. First thing, Connection has rules inside the building. Do not call the police. You cannot call the police to the residents. Second thing, that the neighbors were not participating in the good neighbor agreement and the condition, and they just issued a week ago a new criteria they wanted to add. If you want, do you have an access to it, Nafred? Yeah, maybe he can come and read it here, Carl. This is what the neighbor wants. What is he going to read to be added to this? But as the original one, I think, is just talk. They cannot do anything. Everything they're going to say, the Home Bill of Rights, we cannot apply that. No criminal come here and things like that. And homeless always, as the first consultant said, that the Homeless Bill of Rights applied only to individual, not to organization. But Homeless Connection always claim it to hide everything what's going into place. Okay.
Carl Kettler, I'm the owner of a building within 500 feet of the property. I've owned the property for 33 years. It's a rental property, and I lived in the building for 11 years. I'm in the process of moving back into the building. I'm very connected to my tenants. It's the only building that I own, so I'm a small landlord. And I did participate in the Good Neighbor Agreement Committee, somewhat grudgingly. It was John Nusma sent out an appeal because he had a very small response for people to participate in that committee. I did talk to a lot of people in the general neighborhood, and a lot of people felt, as I did at the time, that the committee may not really present an opportunity to express what the needs and concerns of the community are. So I was on the committee in the selection process to be representing landlords. In fact, I was really representing my own tenants. I had frequent conversations with my tenants. They were all concerned with the initial establishment of Margarita Inn as a homeless shelter. I have had people that have expressed that they're not sure that they want to stay in the building. When you talk about property values, I am what's defined as a naturally occurring low-income housing. So my rents are all reflective of low-income housing, although as a building from 1926, I don't have any obligation to be meeting that need. Currently, 25% or more of my gross annual income goes to property taxes between the city of Evanston and Cook County. And if you talk to any other landlords, 25% of gross is a very big number to take off the top going to taxes. If this goes through, the effect on property values is very hard to nail down in a short period of time. So when you're asking the question of anybody else that can speak to property values, I won't know for 3 or 4 years. That'll come out as a naturally occurring process as I have turnover of tenants, as I find out what I'm able to or not able to rent apartments for. So that's a very long-term process, and that's why I trust the research of experts that are coming in and presenting their position on that. As far as participation in the Good Neighbor Agreement Committee, it was advertised for participation, but it was very challenging to get people from the community to participate. I offered it up to my own tenants. None of them had an interest in taking the time to participate in that process. So again, I was kind of their proxy in that. And one of the things that has come out through this whole process is that there are many, many more people in the immediate area who may not have even been aware early on of that Good Neighbor Agreement Committee. So the participation was thin. You have my submission, which points out to the participation, the members of the committee. It was very heavily weighted to one side, and to a large extent, those of us in the community ultimately felt like we were not in a position to be really representing the community in an official capacity. We really relied on John Nusma in his capacity as an elected official to do that. So all we could do is really just kind of provide that level of feedback. A physician in the area, he's a retired doctor from the University of Illinois. He also was more recently aware of some of the concerns being expressed, and he added a statement. He learned about the group only a couple of days ago, saw a draft of the items that were included in the Good Neighbor Agreement, the one that was submitted by this group, not the Good Neighbor Agreement that was signed by Ms. Boggs and the mayor. He also points out that his observation, and he is a gentleman, Alan Factor, who has worked with Connections for the Homeless on the Commission of Aging. He expressed that there was, again, unwillingness to provide data on successful resident outcomes and recidivism. Just some more concerns on that. He was He was in the Department of Disability and Human Development at the University of Illinois, Chicago. He co-directed a federally funded Center on Aging with Developmental Disabilities. I actually interacted with him. I previously owned a business in senior care, so I know him well and I know his reputation. But again, he just was expressing concerns to the philosophy that is currently being followed. And again, I think the committee has seen some of the controversy about how the execution of Housing First can make a difference in terms of the outcome. And again, I think some of the other testimony this evening goes to that. So that's all I have to add.
Commissioner Halleck, you turned your light on. Did you have a question?
The reason you were talking, and I thought you addressed what I was going to ask, which is that, and I can't be more specific, but in the newspaper, not in the information we got, was this a new neighborhood agreement.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if that's what you were addressing.
It is.
And so do you think that I read it, do you think what's in there is adequate?
You know, the problem which we discussed at length in the 5 or 6 meetings that we had for the Good Neighbor Agreement at the at the property. The problem is that at the end of the day, it's a non-enforceable agreement. And I know it was presented early on as kind of one of the legs of the stool that was supposed to be in combination with the license agreement. And I know there's issues that have been expressed, and that's not this committee, but I know there have been concerns expressed as far as whether or not the city really has the resources to monitor and enforce a license agreement. And then, when I look at my own tenants and their concerns, one of the things that I have a concern about is, so if things don't work out, then what is the process and how long is the process to be able to go back and make a correction on that? So granting the special use, if it meets the requirements, which has also been subject to some question here, it still is a concern to me as a property owner nearby that that if it turns out that it doesn't go well, then what's the process to reverse that?
All right, thank you. I have a question for staff, and I don't know who can answer this. This may go to council. I don't know if you can even answer it. There is talk of this operating agreement as part of the licensing and everything like that. Where kind of is that in the process? Where are we on that?
So the city, good evening again, Commissioners, Nicholas Cummings, Corporation Counsel. The city engaged the services of an outside attorney and land use professional, and he reviewed the agreement that had been crafted by staff in conjunction with multiple departments and city staff, conjunction with the council member that represents the ward, and in collaboration with Connections for the Homeless, for that matter. So we believe we're actually probably closer to a final version. I have received that feedback from the outside practitioner. I have not personally reviewed it. I know that Deputy City Attorney Ruggie has. I don't know when the next meeting to go over it is, but we do have something closer to a final agreement.
All right.
Should that be, but the code doesn't require it to be in place until like 90 days after.
Right. And what sort of enforcement mechanisms are there in such an operating agreement? How would the city go about enforcing such an agreement?
So, to put it plainly or shortly, a breach of the agreement could lead to the revocation of the license. If you can't have a license, you can't operate the facility. Was brought up a moment ago about what sort of mechanisms. Even there's a process in our city code to revoke a special use permit. So there are many mechanisms that the city would use, or could use, I should say, should this turn out to be a failure or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Let me just see. Are there other questions from commissioners at this particular moment? Mr. Halim. Wait till you get to the microphone, please. Thank you.
The neighbor just came with a proposed item they want to be included. Number one, they want to limit the occupant in the Margarita Inn to homeless from Evanston. They don't want people to come from all over Chicago to Margarita Inn. Second thing, they want that limit the occupancy, reduce the 70 people to less number. I just puzzled. The architect didn't talk, but rooms which 150 square foot, the arrangement now to have, some of them they'll have double occupant. When you take 150 square foot, take the bathroom from it, take the closet, take the bed, the two beds in it, you will have a walkway 3 feet wide to go out. So the people who will walk in the morning have to go out of this room. They cannot stay. They go on the street, beg. The homeless lost all their dignity and pride. They're in this it's like a prison cell. It is not really a room. They go out, they beg, they make $50 a day. There are no facility within the facility to treat them. They don't have a nurse to be sure that they take their medicine. We really have took all the dignity from the homeless in the building the way it is designed now and it's allowed. The neighbor wants to Nefret, I lost the sheet. To separate men and women. They want one floor for men, one floor for women, one floor for families. And I think we had another, which did not testify, somebody who worked for the homeless, and he can tell us what goes inside the connection facility. It's a disaster the way to put 70 people. There are they can be mixed. Women here, men here, they could be harassed, they could be assaulted. So the neighbors want floor for men, floor for women, and children. What does they say about children?
Separate unaccommodate.
Yeah, separate families and children, and install cameras, and open it to the police. Connection, they have instruction to the people inside. You are not allowed to call the police. Why is that? We don't know. They're hiding.
Provide anonymous channel. Here, provide.
Yeah, read it in a phrase.
I'm just going to help him with the reading.
I don't speak English.
Provide an anonymous channel independent of connection staff for residents to report if they are being harassed or otherwise feel endangered. Prohibit use, that's one point. Prohibit use of drugs, alcohol, and firearms in and around the Margarita with immediate eviction for violation and sharing of information with police. Provide full-time certified social worker staffing at a ratio of no less than 1 worker for every 10 residents. I'll be right back.
I just want to say one thing. First thing, I'm very sorry I went to court twice. And I left my country 50 years ago because I wanted my freedom, I wanted to speak. So I apologize to all of you. This is the first time I went to court against the municipality, and I apologize for that. But I think we're in Evanston here. We always led the whole nation for progressive thinking. The whole nation is suffering today from this no barrier shelters. Every place, and if we approve it, we'll not lead. I think we should lead the whole country to find a new way how to take care of our homeless. Evanston only. I want this committee to understand we have the right in Evanston to limit the homeless to people in Evanston. I am a landlord in Evanston. I did very little eviction in the last 30 years in Evanston. We have a few homeless people in Evanston, but we need to give them better treatment than putting them in this jail cell. And all we want, just how much we get money from HUD. I think Connection, all their interest, just get as many people in Evanston and get the biggest grant from HUD. So I urge you to lead the country to a better solution. Let's act like always Evanston did. We're a liberal state, and we give example to everybody. Approving this is not going to do anything to all these homeless people in all over the United States. So I'm urging you to vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Halim.
Chair,
Yes.
is Connections going to speak?
Yes, I'm going to ask them to speak next, but I wanted to get any questions we had for the neighbor before we did that. Any other questions? If not, I will ask Connections if they'd like to speak. Because I did grant some extra time to the neighbors, I will grant you 10 minutes.
Thank you.
For your time.
William McKenna, one of the attorneys for Connections. I'm going to ask Ms. Lindberger and Mr. Kiesel to come on up because we respect your time and we're going to try and stick to it, and they're going to speak a little bit. So a couple things I wanted to say to the commission. First, I want to remind the commission of that wonderful night we spent here back in November, where there was quite a bit of evidence already put into this record. You heard all about how the program works. You heard about the the treatment available, the social workers who are on staff, the medical professionals involved. You heard all of that. At that time, you didn't hear from our appraiser. We were trying to truncate things, but her report had been submitted, which concluded there was no negative effect on value. She's here tonight and will address it. And you heard about all the special use factors from George Kiesel, who also discussed crime statistics, for better or worse, or distortion of crime statistics. So we now have another 400 plus pages from this objector. And you've heard from a number of his witnesses, including his experts, here tonight. And we're not going to have the time to go through all that point by point. But we can tell you in general that these presentations are flawed in a great number of ways. You'll hear about facts that are wrong, methodology and data that is skewed, and there's witnesses who just, they're biased or they have an interest in this affair. But bottom line, really, despite all that, there's nothing that you heard tonight or that is in this 400 pages that you haven't heard already, because we had dozens and dozens of community members come up and present their views and talk about every single one of these issues. But I do want to particularly reference the experts here tonight. We've all called experts. They've got experts here. We've had some experts. And, you know, we live in a society where there's all kinds of people who either self-styled or through other means present themselves as experts. And there's all kinds of topics and social issues, and it can be really hard to figure out who you should listen to and who you shouldn't. So you're going to hear from our experts in a minute, and you can weigh their testimony against the testimony of these experts. But before you do, what I'm here to tell you is there is one reason why you can really believe in Connections and this program and this application, and that's because the data shows that it works. 70% of the individuals who stay at the Margarita Inn exit into a housing solution. The national average is 40%. That evidence was all presented to you back in November. And I'm just here to remind you of that. You know, regardless of the various arguments that are being made by these objectors, there's a professional team of trained and educated, credentialed clinicians who manage the Margarita Inn using programmatic best practices. These are practices that have been researched, studied, evaluated, and endorsed, and they're all recommended by the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, which is a federal agency, the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, HUD, the Illinois Department of Human Services, Cook County, and the Alliance to End Homelessness in suburban Cook County. And you heard in November from several of these entities, and particularly the Alliance. So I know there's a lot of opinions about how a program like the Margarita Inn's program should operate, but there is actually a really well-defined scope of how it should operate correctly. The Margarita Inn is actually a model program and one that this commission should be proud to recommend. Now, at this point, I'm going to ask Ms. Lindberger to come up and respond to the testimony of Mr. DeClark and Mr. Renzi.
Thank you. I'm Mary Lindberger. I'm a real estate appraiser. I live in Evanston. I've lived here for 35 years. I'm going to be very brief because I know George Kiesel has many more things to address. But one of the things I wanted to point out to you is that Mr. DeClark spoke very glancingly about the data that he gathered and said that it supported his conclusions. And I guess I would say to you, you need to look a lot harder at that data because in many ways it's flawed and in error. And I'm not going to get down in the weeds, though I've spent a lot of time in the weeds on his report, but I'm going to point out a couple of things to you that you ought to consider when you blithely assume, and I hope you won't, that the Margarita is diminishing property values. As he referenced the fact, he looks at control areas. He looks at control areas for 4 facilities. One of them is the Margarita, and the other 3 are Hilda's Place, Albany Care, and Greenwood Care. Obviously, none of these 3 facilities are up for discussion tonight, and all of them have been in business for a long time. When he looks at these other 3 facilities, he picks a certain control area. and he defines the control area, and he provides you data regarding it. However, there's a lot of inconsistency about the data he has on this control area. And I know this is detail, but it drives his conclusion, and so you need to be aware of it. On page 44, he tells you that the control area experienced a 45% increase in property values over the period 2018 through 2023. On page 48, he tells you the same control area experienced a 4.8% decline over the same period. Now, one of these pages is wrong, or maybe both of them are wrong, but he uses this control area to make judgments about value increases or decreases in the areas surrounding the properties he's studying. Secondly, I would point out that he doesn't use this control area when he evaluates the Margarita. He picks a completely different control area for that property, and the control area is an interesting one. Around the Margarita, as you're probably well aware, the buildings there are older, the ones that are owner-occupied. They're older buildings, probably at least 50 years old. Most of them are 1- and 2-bedroom units. They're small, and he reports that, and this seems quite accurate to me, that over the 5 years he studied, the average price in the area surrounding the Margarita ranged from about $118,000 per unit to $168,000 per unit. So for Evanston, that's a modestly priced housing unit. There's no doubt about it. However, in his control area that he uses to determine whether the Margarita diminishes property values, the average prices there range from $413,000 to $496,000. And he concludes that this price range is well above the control area that he used for the other three facilities. He concludes that the appreciation rate for these clearly more modern and larger, more expensive units in the control area was greater because they were not near the Margarita, rather than the fact that they are simply a different unit and attract a different kind of buyer. And lastly, I would point out he concludes that his data, flawed as it is, supports the fact that the Margarita diminishes property values. Interestingly enough, his data, if you look at it, indicates that Albany Care seems to increase property values because the rate of increase in the area surrounding Albany Care facility is higher than for the control group, the control area he cites for Albany Care. Neither of those things are true. The Margarita does not depress value, and Albany Care does not increase value. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. For the record, my name is George Kissel. I'm a licensed architect and certified planner, and as you know, I testified prior on this case quite a while ago. I'm going to basically just address the standards that have been addressed by the opposition. The first standard has to do with whether it's one of the special uses specifically listed in the zoning ordinance. We know the opposition is now disputing something that's been established in prior hearings, mainly that the proposed use is indeed properly classified as a rooming house. They basically claim 3 points in support of that assertion. They assert that the definition anticipates that there's a keeper and that guests are not a member of the keeper's family. And it says that Connections' use of the Margarita Inn does not involve a keeper who lives at the Margarita Inn with their family. The opposition assumes that keeper means someone who lives at the facility with their family. This is false.
Mr. Kissel, I just want to make you aware of time, so if you
Okay.
could just hit the highlights, please.
All right. Well, we're going to just move on from that because I believe it's a ridiculous argument. With respect to the second standard, which has to do with it being keeping in the purpose and policies of the comprehensive plan, we know that Evanston's plan is from 2000. It's more than 22 years old. It was not published March 27th of 2023. In fact, the RFP for the new comp plan was just let in April. As indicated in prior reports and testimony, Evanston's 2000 comprehensive plan is generally mute on the issues relevant to this proposal, and it references the city's HUD consolidated plans for detailed discussion of policies regarding housing and homelessness. Quotes from the comp plan basically state that the consolidated plan should be referred to for more detailed analysis of the housing market vis-a-vis housing Evanston's special needs populations and policies for addressing homelessness in the community. Those policies are cited in the prior reports and testimony, and the proposed use is consistent with those policies. As a result, it is consistent with the adopted plans, even though it's obsolete. I'll just finish with the third standard because the rest of them basically.
Please address standard 3 and 4, because those were the two where we had discrepancy last time.
Certainly, and we'll go through that. So, first of all, this is the standard that has to do with whether there'll be a negative cumulative effect on the immediate area or neighborhood. Again, the proposed use is substantially similar to the prior use that has existed for more than a century. The land use impact of the rooming house is not significantly altered by the change of its clientele. Its hours of operation, impact on traffic, noise, vibration, odor, danger from fire, flood, explosion, or hazardous materials do not change significantly. While it is clear that there's been an increase in demand for police and fire and EMT services, that increase does not represent an undue burden on either the police or fire department or on the surrounding neighborhood or the city at large. I want to point out that the objector's data focuses only on the quantity of police responses without consideration of the quality or type. I also want to point out that they evaluate 5 years of data in 2 bar chart columns, which means that one has 2 years worth of calls and one has 3. Very easy to figure out how that works and how that is absolutely not a valid comparison or a valid set of data. Expressing the difference as a simple percentage is indeed misleading. And there was a question that was asked about whether we'd updated the data on the crime
I'm going to
statistics.
ask you to go ahead and just finish your statement on 4, and then we'll ask you questions.
Okay, all right. So regarding the impact on values, that's been discussed by Ms. Lindberger, and I don't need to go into that.
All right, thank you. While you're there, since one of the questions did come up, Commissioner Halleck, I believe it was your question about police reports between 2022 and today, or 20.
Do you have any data on criminal activity after November of last year till now?
A very small amount, but let me present what we did with it.
Thank you. So for the record, we've been handed a document, police calls to 1550 block of Oak Avenue, 2017 to 2022, March to March.
Right. So what you're seeing here is an analysis of police calls to the 1550 block of Oak that provides context and detail regarding which calls were specifically attributed to the Margarita Inn and which ones were internal to the Margarita Inn, in other words, which had no outside impact. The 2022 to 23 data, and this is from the same sources that have been quoted by the opposition. They're from FOIA requests from the City of Evanston, as well as from the dashboard for some of the historic data that's available online. The 2022-23 data, we received the information from March to the end of December. In 2022, we prorated that by increasing it by 25% to account for the fourth quarter. That's a conservative estimate because, as we all know, in the winter months, there's less activity surrounding the area and generally less crime or less demand for police calls in that. And what this shows is certainly an increase when the Margarita Inn began operating. And again, to remind, this is tabulated from March to March so that we have an apples-to-apples annual look at what the impact is, because the Margarita Inn opened in March of 2020. And what you see is the beginning of a decline in the amount of calls that have been drawn to the Margarita Inn. That's all I really have to say about that.
Yeah, when I look at this, though, I see that the external calls have increased and the internal calls have decreased in this chart, but we also heard testimony that said that you're not reporting these to the police. So I mean, I have to take that into consideration. So I'm not sure that this shows me the real story.
Well, the data is from FOIA from the City of Evanston Police Department, and that's what they're providing.
I understand, but if you're not reporting internal crimes, then it's not going to show up here.
No, the internal crimes are just the ones, so we have internal data from Connections for the Homeless as to the calls that originate from inside the Margarita Inn that apply to only incidents inside the Margarita Inn. And that's what that number is. So the 46, 58, and 67 are all of the calls from the police data attributable to the 1566 address. The breakdown in between there is provided from information from the Margarita Inn and Connections for the Homeless.
Is it also true that the resident population has decreased in the last several months?
I don't know.
I think these are questions for somebody else on their team. Yeah.
Indeed. Anything else for me? I'll go out and have a seat.
I think so. We'll call you back up if something does come up.
So I did want to just add one thing to Commissioner Halleck's recent question about 911 calls, and this is already in your materials. The policy was in our on 911 calls is at page 16 of the operating procedures that are in the special use permit package. So you'll see the policy that says when and under what circumstances you should call police.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
This came up just a while ago about this new neighborhood agreement.
Right.
And I read it, and I thought there were a lot of good things in it. What does Connections think about it?
So let me ask Ms. Boggs and Tina, do you want to come up and address that?
Evening, everyone. I'm Betty Bogg. I'm the CEO of Connections for the Homeless. With me is Tina White. She's our Chief Program Officer. So we did see the Good Neighbor Agreement when it came out in the paper, like you did. We didn't have an opportunity to collaborate on that agreement in any way. There are some things in that agreement that are already happening. There are some that are not reasonable. There are some that are contained in our upcoming, or as far as I know, going to be contained in our upcoming operating agreement as part of our license.
Which ones are not agreeable?
Particularly limiting the residents to 30 in a facility that size with the demand that there is for shelter beds in this community, falsely depressing the number of beds to what amounts to an arbitrary number doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah, but I think that's a fundamental issue. I think that's a fundamental argument in a residential community like this one on this block to limit the number of people. Easier to control, easier to monitor, all of that. That's just my personal.
Yeah, I understand why that would be the case, and we do limit the number of people. You asked if we had had a decrease in population over the last few months. At the very peak of the pandemic, we were running operations out of 3 different hotels, and I agree with you that there is a cap to the number of people that should be in a facility like this. We had about 200 people at the Orrington, and that was too much. That was too much. 30 is not sufficient, and so we're not trying to just pack as many people as we can in there. The reason that our population has decreased, we at one point had about 70 people in there toward the beginning of the pandemic, but we've taken more rooms offline, more sleeping rooms offline, in order to provide more meeting space. We have a medical clinic there now, so the decrease in populations is directly related to the increase in services.
How many people are you currently housing?
We are generally between 50 and 60. It depends on household configuration. If a family, if there's just a single guy in a room, that's going to decrease the population. We could have a family with 4 children in it. That would increase the population.
Yeah. I've just been told to make sure you're speaking into the microphone. They're having
apologies.
trouble hearing you
So sorry.
on the TV. Problems we have with modern
I'm tall.
technology. Question to staff. So if I remember correctly, and I could look it up, but I don't know exactly where to find it in all these pages, there are 44 rooms, if I'm correct. Is that correct?
I believe there was 46.
Okay, so for generally that number there. So we're looking if they're housing 50 people, it's roughly one person per room, although I do realize there are families, there are couples, things like that. Do all the rooms meet the requirements for the occupancy that would be required under the zoning code?
The zoning code does not dictate occupancy,
yeah.
but my understanding is that they do meet the occupancy requirements by property standards.
Okay, thank you.
So that standard allows for 2 people to be in a 150 square foot room?
Yeah, it's really, we've discussed that before when it's been before us on other cases of people wanting to put stuff in. So I'll get just a moment. We want to make sure everybody gets recorded and heard. Mr. Kissel?
If I could address the issue regarding occupancy. So there's a standard that exists that was provided us by staff that dictates 50 square foot per person for multiple occupancy in a room. So I did the analysis based on the square footage of each room, excluding bathrooms and excluding circulation. For the 46 rooms in the Margarita Inn, the average size based on that kind of criteria is about 212 square feet. So the actual occupancy per code allowed approaches 170. So the 70 occupants that are being asked for and the 50 to 60, they're well below whatever the code would allow.
Just to clarify what you said 220 square feet with average without the bathrooms?
212 without bathroom and any circulation halls within the unit.
Okay.
Just to confirm that is correct, as we're going through emails and finding some of that data that we knew we had somewhere. And also, just to remind everyone that those occupancy limits, those are based on rooms for a rooming house. These are not each full dwelling units, so that may make a difference.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, these are not classified as dwelling units because there's no kitchen facility.
Right. All right, thank you. Ms. Bogg, I'm going to ask you and Ms. White to return, please. Sorry to have you bounce up and down. Some of the other things, we'd started talking about some of the things that were concerns of the neighborhood. And whereas we don't really weigh into the whole good neighbor agreement, that's not our purview. The operating license is not really our purview either. But we do make recommendations based on things, and if we feel some of those things do affect the use of the special use that we're recommending, we would put those in to raise the flag to City Council of, hey, this is something you should look at, consider. So some of the other things that have come up through that agreement, I know we talked back in November about alcohol use, drug use, that sort of stuff. Could you kind of remind us of the policies?
Sure. I'll start with the drug use. Any substance that's illicit outside of the margarita is not allowed inside the margarita, so that's pretty clear. We do allow alcohol use in private rooms. We do not allow any alcohol use inside in any common areas, and it can't be consumed in front of other people. The way we deal with disruption that may be caused by any number of things, sober people can cause all kinds of disruption, as can people who are intoxicated, is we deal with the behavior. So it's not that the issue isn't whether someone goes to their room and has a beer after work. The issue is if they are up causing, pardon me, sorry, my contact just slipped a bit, causing a disruption in the community, and that's what we will always deal with.
The issue of firearms also. I'm sorry, the issue of firearms also came
No
up.
firearms are allowed.
No firearms are permitted.
Or weapons of any kind.
Weapons of any kind. There was a suggestion made that this be for Evanston only. I know that there are federal county laws that regulate housing. Would you like to address that at all?
What I can address, and perhaps, sorry, Mr. Cummings, would like to speak to the legality of it. What I can tell you is, at any given time, about 80% of the people that we're serving are from Evanston. We do not have contracts with other municipalities to house people at the Margarita. We do receive most of our operating funds from Cook County, but the reality is that the people who are homeless are generally from this area.
Mr. Cummings, would you like to add anything?
I would only add that it really depends on where Connections receive its funding from. So if they get federal dollars, they get state dollars. There's going to be limitations on what they can do with those dollars, including discriminate based upon residency or lack of residency, race, color, creed, national origin, age, et cetera, et cetera.
Typical housing things. All right, thank you. Other questions from Commissioner Westerberg?
I don't want to dwell too much on this. I know there has been a lot of discussion about your relationship with the police, your working relationship with the police, and I'm assuming you saw the letter from the previous chief of police in the packet. Can you comment on what has changed since November of last year with how you are approaching your relationship with the police to make sure that neighbors will feel that if something happens, you will be actively engaged with the process of resolving it, and how you will do that with the police?
Sure. I can share that we have had a series of meetings with beat cops and police leadership in which we sort of talked with our line staff and their line staff about how these relationships were going, and we got a lot of great feedback from that. We have strong relationships with police leadership. Chief Stewart and I talk regularly. She shared with me that she's has no problem with us whatsoever. I believe you did put a condition in the SUP for us to allow access to police with a lockbox. I will say that, in my opinion, Chief Eddington mischaracterized our relationship with the police. We do call the police when we should. We do not have a don't call 911 policy. When we call the police, we let them in. If a resident calls the police, we let the police in. The only time when we're invoking that homeless Bill of Rights is when a police officer may be conducting an investigation and they just kind of show up and go, hey, does Fred live here? They need to have proper legal authority to do that. If they have a search warrant or a subpoena, we will absolutely cooperate with that legal authority. And that's a very unusual condition. I mean, that just doesn't happen that much.
Other questions from commissioners? Not seeing any. Thank you. I'm going to just do a quick little, I'll let you do a quick little summation to anything, and then I'll give you the final word, sir, on anything.
I don't like public speaking, and I'm doing this because I have been charged with looking at these police reports, and what you have heard is not true, and I am upset about it because there are instances of things happening in the building that are unconscionable. There are little children who are in bad situations, who are getting injured.
Sorry, so just two things really quick. So if nobody reports crime, then it's not reported as data. I just want to point that out. There's a huge problem with that going on across America right now, with crimes not being reported. This right here, I just want to share really briefly. This is the Margarita Inn Participant Handbook. It says 911 calls right here, number G. Calling 911 should be limited strictly to life-threatening emergencies. For non-life-threatening medical needs, please contact Connection staff to determine appropriate course of action. So if you're being robbed or assaulted, but it's not life-threatening, you shouldn't call 911? That's what it says. It's in writing. I just want to make that clear. Like, you guys got to be honest. Like, we have to be honest. I'm sorry I'm frustrated, but we have to be honest about this. Thank you.
I'm very sorry about that. I have little children, and this bothers me. There are multiple instances, with one instance one instance that comes to mind, but there are others where there is a little boy who is being beaten up so badly by his mom, and the maid comes to help him because there's no staff around, and there are no cameras. And the maid gets the caseworker, and the caseworker says, the maid says, call the police. And in the police report, it says, don't call. We're going to handle it. Our staff is going to handle it. I cannot accept that. I cannot accept that happening to a little child. There are situations, another police report, where a man is raped, and the police come to do an investigation, and they cannot get access to the building. They cannot get floor plans. This police officer goes to the building multiple times, and he is met consistently with refusal and non-cooperation. I can't accept it. It is not acceptable. And for no one, for the person in the building, for the child in the building, the finances, whatever. This is unacceptable to be happening in this town. I can't accept that. For children and for people who are vulnerable. You can't put vulnerable people next to people who are going to be predatory to them and have no staff and no cameras and no access to videos. And the surveys that you have with the police, 100%. The police say when we come there, they act like they don't want us. We come because you call us. We never want to be there ever because you make us know that you don't want to be there. We have had problems in our buildings. We have seen very bad things. And unless you come to the table and be honest about what you're doing, open your doors and be transparent, this will never work in this community and we'll never accept it.
Excuse me. Who are you?
I am Nefret Halim. I work with Mr. Halim, and I help in the company. I work in the company. I'm at the museum very regularly. I talk to our staff. I've had to clean up fecal matter in front of our building.
But how do you know what you just said?
Because I have every police report. I have tried. The police activity in these buildings is overwhelming. I could not assemble a packet for this body before me, and it's why I'm so upset. Because we are giving people, we're community people, but this is not right. This is not right on any level. When this homeless shelter is done correctly, we're going to be the first people to donate it. We'll come and open your door. But this is not acceptable.
Mr. Halim?
I hope you feel sorry for me. I have 3 of these daughters. So. But I really believe that the data that gave you is all wrong. I have the, William, can you come please here? William tell you that 50% of the building is 150 square feet. And if I has any conscience, I was putting 2 people in a room, 150 square feet with 2 feet. And William have studied the floor plan in the building. There are no facilities in it. There are no facility for nurse staff, for a social worker, meeting room. Isn't in the morning when people wake up, you're supposed to have lectures for them, try to rehab them. Is this right, William?
That's right.
So, if you could state your name, please, for the
My name
record.
is William Ng. I'm a licensed architect for the past 24 years. And so I studied the shelter and the floor plans. And, you know, the rooms, not only the rooms are the issue for the psychological development of the residents, but also just the density in the building. If we fill all 46 rooms, what do we have left over? Do we have enough support spaces? Do we have rehabilitation spaces? And I don't think, there's any rooms left over other than the common spaces on the first floor and the basement. So I think that's the key issue. If we pack the building with 70-plus beds, do we have enough services left over to help the residents?
Now, I am here for Evanston to take a lead and take care of our, don't go, William, to take care of our homeless. William have studied about new rules came for building shelters or even rehabbing all building. So you can have a modern place. You can take care of these poor people. They don't have this 3-foot walk to go in the morning, and they have nowhere to go. William, can you explain what is a modern shelter built or rehab? What this consists of?
So there's a study, and so in 2016, New York City implemented their design guidelines for supportive housing. And they transformed a neighborhood building, a pretty big building, into a model design. And not only is it housing the tenants and the residents, but it also made sure that they had enough separation for the different populations they have. And they also had, so I'll just go through the list real quick: security screening areas, medical triage centers, shelter support services, resident workshop areas, resident educational services, resident employment services, initial assessment dormitories, secluded diversion dormitories, general population dormitories, separate family dormitories, resident and employee lounges, dining areas, general staff offices, building infrastructure, maintenance rooms, nurse areas. So, do we have these areas to support the residents?
And you said that came from New York City?
New York City, 2016, design guidelines for supportive housing.
And they built the
Right.
rehab building in New York.
Yes, it's currently operating.
All right, thank you.
It is just, I think we should, I have no problem with getting in like a Margarita, and I'm the one who's fighting this, a shelter. But let's do it right. Let's talk to them. Maybe, I don't know, you or the council, go back to the drawing table. Talk to the neighbor, talk to us. And so we can make a shelter that is, we be proud of it. You come in Evanston, we build the best shelter in the country. Come see what we did, and we do it like this. But as of now, it consists of a jail cells, no more than this. And the worst thing, in jails, they give treatment to people. This one, jail cell without any treatment for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halim. How is she involved with your organization, Mr. Halim? Is it a procedural question or a comment question? I can't take citizen comment at this point.
No, Craig is an employer, he was an employee.
I'm not, he has submitted documentation. He has testified before us at the last time we had this hearing. So we have his information on record. I don't want to start repeating information. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on your name. McKellen? McKenna. Mr. McKenna, as the applicant, since this is a continuation, we always give the applicant the last word.
Sure.
In order to make a final summation statement, anything you would like to wrap up.
So the only things I'm going to add, because you've heard plenty about this particular application, I'm sure more than you wanted to, but, we got to take some things in perspective. We do have a policy, a 911 policy, to call in any urgent situation that threatens harm. Okay? We also are a DCFS mandated reporting agency. If there is a possible claim of child abuse, we are mandated by law to report it. So we do report it. Dead wrong on people saying we don't do background checks. We screen. We screen for multiple violent felonies. We screen for Class X felonies. We screen for sex offenders. I think you already heard, we do not permit illicit drugs of any kind, dealing of any kind. We have a progressive discipline system, and you're out for circumstances like that. Comments about our current relationship with the police are wrong. We have a very robust relationship right now, getting better by the day, and we intend to continue with that and to work in good faith with the city on the operating agreement. We already have a signed good neighbor agreement, and we're going to cooperate and participate in the licensing program. We're committed to it because we believe we have an absolute quality organization. Comments by the gentleman who was just up here, who was the architect, first off, he's never been inside the facility. Second of all, he's dead wrong on what we don't have. We have separate screening space. We have separate medical space. We have shelter support services space. We have staff offices, and we have separate rooms for families and resident workshop space. And he's basing his argument on a 2016 supportive housing standards. Supportive housing is apartments. Those are apartments with support for the individuals who reside in the apartments. Those are not applicable standards to a rooming house. So I would just come all the way back and say, per the standards, we've met every one of them. There is no negative impact. The prices of housing in this area, as shown by Ms. Lindberger's study, she went through it, and she showed you where an individual apartment within the close vicinity of the Margarita Inn sold immediately before Margarita moved in and sold again after Margarita moved out. There's no adverse impact. That's the gold standard test, not this crazy target and control zone test. So there's no negative value on the property. And as Mr. Kiesel said today, and as he said in November, yes, there are police reports. They are a tiny fragment of the police reports that are reported throughout this community. So, and we are working on it and will continue to work on it. So I would just sum up by saying I think we meet all the standards for a special use, and we would thank this commission for the patience and attention to detail and your ability to endure all of this testimony and all of these comments. And we would ask you respectfully for a recommendation in favor of the SUP. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we're going to close public testimony on this particular case. Commissioners, I'm not taking any testimony from the public. It was noticed as such. The public is not speaking tonight. They've had ample opportunity. This was a continuation for a specific person to present specific evidence to us. So I will ask commissioners their general thoughts.
I'll go first. This is a really sad situation. I'm sitting here listening to both sides, and it's like a political football that goes back and forth, and the testimony is virtually the opposite when each side gets up to speak. And I would think, in a city like ours, which I would hope that we communicate better than other cities, that there would be more discussion, more negotiation on all these points. But instead, what we have is one side talking black and the other side talking white, and it's just sad. My opinion on this is that, in fact, somebody said it, is that we got to do this right. And I don't think we're there yet. And maybe the cart is before the horse right now, because it was interesting. I had a flashback to, you weren't here, but we had a meeting last week, and the situation was totally different. But what the consensus was is that we had so many qualifications to our recommendation that it was almost meaningless. And I feel somewhat the same about this, because, for example, this neighborhood agreement that just came out, and Connections said, well, we're going to do some of it and we're not going to do other things. And, well, it's so undefined. And I would, to really vote one way or the other, for all of us, I think we would appreciate a much more defined proposal right now, it's just not. As far as some of the specific issues and the negative effect on the neighborhood, the studies, there's one study, and then there's the other study that, or testimony that says the opposite. I have to use common sense on this, and the question is, would I, knowing about the criminal activity and the other things that have been going on at Connections, would I want to buy a house next door? And I think all of us should ask ourselves that question. It's because it's not a question of, do you think there should be homeless facilities? Yeah, there should be, absolutely. But I don't know that this one is operating to the best standard that it can operate on. And what I hear is what's going on in the community. I frankly would not want to buy a house on that block, and I think that tells me that that standard is not met. As far as the number of residents and the facilities and the more treatment services, I think that's all good, and I think that should be pursued. That's the kind of homeless facility I think that we want in Evanston, no matter where it's located. As far as some of these rules, whether they're enforceable or not, I don't think that's our purview. I think it's probably the city council's. But that's a big issue. So I don't know. I've been taking notes, and I don't know if I've covered everything, but that's enough.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Westerberg?
First of all, I appreciate all the work and research that went into the original proposal as well as the public responses. This, I know, has not been easy for anyone on either side of this. I'm not going to comment on what the program should be or whether Connections is the right agency or what the city should do at this point. I don't think any of us are experts on solving the homeless issues or looking at housing programs and substance abuse programs. I want to simply look at really the one condition that's we have to satisfy in order to approve this. And I'm going to go back, unfortunately, to this designation of rooming house, which I have had problems with in the past and continue to do so. I mean, very simply, I still don't believe that the Connections program as described fits the zoning definition or the traditional operation of a rooming house. Unlike in a traditional rooming house, there's no direct rental transaction between residents and Connections. And while a traditional rooming house might have some criteria for residents, generally the acceptance is fairly open. Obviously, Connections has to serve a very specific demographic, and it has to evaluate and select the people it's serving. And I totally understand that. And also, generally, rooming houses don't provide supportive housing programs or counseling support with the express goal of moving people into long-term housing. And finally, rooming house landlords don't usually try to mediate between their residents and the police or the community at large. Now, none of these things are wrong. I mean, these are functions that are an important part of the Connections program, and I'm not questioning that. But they make sense for a supportive transitional housing program as opposed to a rooming house. So, again, this is beating a dead horse, but I really feel the rooming house designation is a little bit off on this one. The second issue is, as Commissioner Halleck has talked about, is the impact on the neighborhood. This is a dense residential commercial area, and we've heard a lot of testimony about problems in the past. Whether they reach the substantive level, the threshold that should cause a lot of alarm, it depends, as we've heard, about who you're listening to on this. Same thing with property values. But I don't think there's any question that a a transitional housing facility like this will have an impact on the neighborhood. The question is, how bad will it be? How long will that last? What does it take to monitor and evaluate and control the situation? And those questions are still out there. So for me, the problem is I'm not sure that this location is the best one for that type of program. I know the city can work with Connections on an operating agreement, and hopefully that would help, but I question whether there's a more suitable property for doing this. I don't think Connections should have to build their program around neighbor requirements. I don't think that will work for them. I don't think that will work for their population. At the same time, Connections, any social agency does have to take neighbor responses and concerns and safety into consideration. So perhaps a different real estate solution might be of some help here. And those would be my responses.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will go to this end of the dais. Commissioner Alavalo.
We've heard a lot of data from both sides. I don't think that I've seen comparisons apples to apples and oranges to oranges. When it comes to the data, we were thrown that there's been overdoses within the Margarita Inn. Compared to what? In Evanston. Do we know the amount of overdoses that we have in Evanston based on fentanyl and opioids? That was not presented. Okay. Also, the data of all these other crimes that are being associated with the Margarita Inn. How does that compare to other areas in Evanston? I live in the 5th Ward. There's a lot of shootings in the 5th Ward that are not associated with other wards within Evanston. How does that compare to the Margarita Inn? How many of the residents in the Margarita Inn have been incarcerated after an incident compared to other residents in the same neighborhood? I don't see that in any of the reporting and the data that have been presented by either side. So how can I make a judgment on whether it's the Margarita Inn or is it just basically the times that we're living right now? That's all I have to say.
Mr. Miranchov.
I will repeat some of my colleagues. I was a little bit disappointed that this neighborhood agreement was not actually accepted by Connections. So I understand that there is some kind of miscommunication maybe, or I was hoping that this neighborhood agreement will be a fact today, and I see that in what was sent to us, there are things that could be applied to our recommendations and to our conditions. But otherwise, the most important thing that I continue to support is the fact that I believe was not disputed that 70% of the people that are in Margarita Inn find their permanent home after being under the supervision of Connection, and that's the important thing for me. So I'll keep my vote from our previous meeting.
Commissioner Huco, before I ask you your opinion, I'd like to state that Commissioner Huco was not at the meeting in November. Have you had an opportunity to read the meeting minutes and or watch the video of the preceding meeting?
I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and now you can offer your opinions.
As Commissioner Halleck, I'm struggling in that there's a lot of he said, she said here. Competing experts, competing property assessments, value issues. Very difficult reading through the materials and hearing from the various experts to really come to to conclusions. So for me, in some ways, it comes down to, as Commissioner Halleck indicated, common sense, sort of, you know it when you see it. And so I think for me, it's the wrong location, as Commissioner Westberg indicated. I have issues with the rooming house definition, and this doesn't, in my view, fit within that. And I realize this has been an issue we've gone over ad nauseum, but I really have concerns with the negative cumulative effect issue and the property value piece. You look at the crime statistics. I think counsel for the applicant mentioned it's the crime statistics from the Margarita Inn are a tiny fraction of the overall Evanston crime, and that's probably true. But it's a huge percentage of the crime on that block. 2021, it was more than 50%. And in the other 2 years, it's over 30%. So it's not an insignificant contributor to the police and crime issues on that block from one building. So I think for those various reasons, wrong location, rooming house definition issue, I do think it will have a negative cumulative effect, and will have a negative effect just common sense wise, to Commissioner Halleck's point, on the property values. And as I would certainly not be interested in buying a home next to the Margarita with these various issues that are circulating and occurring at that location. So for that reason, I would vote against the request, fully recognizing, though, that we do need to deal with the homeless problem in this city. And I am sympathetic to the thought of, let's see if we can be leaders in how the homeless issues is, just as we are on the reparations issue and other social issues, and do this in a new way that does not result in us becoming the next San Francisco on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hugo. My general thoughts on this, I want to kind of refocus us on the fact that a lot of the stuff that we've heard about, the Good Neighbor Agreement, kind of falls outside of what we are able to put into place. We can infer things from it. We also can look at making some ideas as to how that might improve, because this is the public hearing on this particular matter. I don't think it goes to any other body for anything else, does it? I mean, until we get to the licensing aspect of it.
Correct, yes. The license would need to be approved by the city council.
Correct. Who also will have to make the final determination in this case.
That is correct. And to clarify, they are making a decision on the operating agreement, not on the license.
I'm sorry, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I mean, my general feelings are, we've talked about the rooming house. As far as I'm concerned, that is a done decision. This body has made a determination that the rooming house is the closest definition to what this operation is. That's been settled. And looking through some of the other things, in terms of property values, a lot of the things that we're hearing through property values relate to the operations. I would hope that City Council, in their wisdom, since they are able to look at this more holistically than we are able to, would hear the comments, would address those in an operating agreement as best they can. We've heard testimony from both sides, and I do believe them honestly that they aren't opposed to housing the homeless. I know Mr. Halim's reputation in the city. I know that he is a leader in the city, that he does a lot for the community. I take him at his word for that. I also know Connections for the Homeless is a responsible member of our community, that they have a reputation here, and I bet you I can find somebody who will disagree with me on either one of those. But again, I have to believe that everybody is working for what is in the best interest of Evanston here. My general feeling is that the special use does meet the standards that need to be done, but I really think City Council needs to lead heavily into that operating agreement. And that's something that falls outside our purview. So I can't demand things be put in the operating agreement. I can request, we've done the various conditions that we've placed on it. There's testimony here. I would hope City Council would listen to the testimony that's been recorded this evening and try to figure out a way to make an operating agreement that works. We've also heard from Corporation Counsel that if an operating agreement runs afoul of the terms, that the city does have the authority to revoke licenses and special uses. I know that's not an easy thing to do, nor the thing the city likes to do, but it is a recourse for the city to prevent things from spiraling out of control. How would staff like us to handle our vote? Should I go through the standards again? We basically, Commissioner Halleck is the only one who has not voiced his opinion on the standards previously. You did, Commissioner Halleck. You voted against it the last time. Yeah. You voted on conditions 3 and 4. As did Commissioner Westerberg, Commissioner Aravalo, Miranchev, and myself voted in favor of it. Commissioner Huco was the one who did not vote during the last one.
Can I say something about this? Obviously, the operating agreement is critical, and the operating agreement, frankly, may change my feeling on the issue of the effect on the value of the properties. And I said this last time, it is all about the operations, and I was, excuse me, not objecting to homeless people being sheltered in this facility per se, but I was objecting to what was going on and the policies and the operations, excuse me, as I saw them. So without an operating agreement, how can we know whether, to me, there is no operating agreement until there is one. And so my vote would be, on the standards, would be, well, there's no operating agreement, so I don't
know that City Council would vote on an operating agreement and then send it back to us. That would be out of character for them to do. They're the final decision maker in this matter. So that's why it gets difficult for us. And I have to place faith in our elected officials. They have to answer to the public.
I think we have to, I think we need to react to what we see now and not maybe something else is going to happen later.
Yeah, fully understand. And I would just again reiterate that I would expect the operating agreement to move with this all roughly at the same time. And City Council, like I said, can take into account various things that we can't. Counselor, how would you like me to handle standards?
To answer that question, I think first we needed to see if the commissioners that were previously here are changing their vote. If not, then I would run through the standards for the record for the one commissioner that was not here.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, I'll just kind of run down the dais here. Commissioner Halleck, you were a no vote before. Is that still your vote? Yes. Commissioner Westerberg, you were a no vote last time. Is that still your Is that still your vote? Commissioner Aravalo, you were a yes vote last time. Is that still your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Miranchev, you were a yes vote last time. Is that still your vote?
Yes.
And I also was a yes vote and also stand by my yes vote. Commissioner Huco, I will run through standards and ask you to respond to those standards based on what we discussed last time. So I'm not doing these fresh so that we're all kind of voting on the same thing. So the first one being, is the listed special use in the zoning district is one of the listed special uses in the zoning district in which the property lies? And it was the finding that yes, it was. Is that your finding?
I agree.
Number 2, it complies with the purposes of the policies of the Comprehensive General Plan and Zoning Ordinance. We had found that the building fits the proposed activity of being a rooming house, and the conditions would address the management issues so as to set the standard and make it met, and that this is a repurposing of an existing building which the Comprehensive General Plan does encourage. How do you find on that?
I had an issue with the rooming house issue, but as you indicated, that Rubicon has already been crossed. So on that basis, yes, 2 yes.
Number 3, does not cause a negative cumulative effect in combination with existing special uses or as a category of land use. The finding last time was the conditions that are being placed on the management of the facility will lessen the impact on the neighborhood, and the creation of a good neighbor declaration or some sort of policy that is an agreement between the neighbors will address most of those issues so that the standard is met, as well as the operating agreement, which we were calling a licensing last time. Do you find that standard to be met?
No.
Thank you. Number 4, does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. Various testimony was heard, but a place where people can be housed and given services that they need may do more for property values than having people living homeless on the streets. Commissioner Westerberg commented that it is not in the nature of the rooming house that diminishes the property value, but the operation that can cause the problems. How do you find on that one?
No.
Number 5, it is adequately served by public facilities and services. The infrastructure provided, the infrastructure provided is adequately served, and further testimony about police and fire resources will not provide significant additional insight, and so the standard is met. How do you find on that one?
Yes.
Number 6, does not cause undue traffic congestion. This is not a site that would create traffic, as residents are not typically car owners, and so the standard is met.
Yes.
Number 7, it preserves significant historical and architectural resources. It is recommended to have historic preservation staff conduct a non-binding review of the property before any permits are issued for exterior work on the building. If the review doesn't involve taking it to the Land Use Commission and can be done by staff, the standard is met.
Yes.
Number 8, it preserves significant natural and environmental resources. The building is not being added to, and the landscaping will be maintained, so this condition is met.
Yes.
And number 9, it complies with all other applicable regulations. It assumes that connections will operate Connections will operate under any licensing or operating agreements and will honor a good neighbor agreement.
Yes.
So with that, since you have found some standards are not met, how do you vote in this issue?
I vote no.
You vote no. So I have a 3-3 vote, which means it will move forward to City Council without any recommendation from this body. So it will not have a negative, it will not have a positive, and it will be purely up to City Council to decide how they wish to handle it. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you for seeing us through the many, many meetings we've had on this. We unfortunately do still have some more business to transact. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes and just ask everyone to please leave the room. You can have discussions out in the hallway, but we still have to go through some meetings, some minutes. We need to do the minutes and we need to do rules for the commission, like having that on. Okay, it appears that we are back on the record. So the next item that we have on the agenda for this evening, I skipped over, I'm sorry, the approval of meeting minutes for April 12th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for April 12th, 2023?
I move to approve the minutes for April 12th, 2023.
So moved by Westerberg. Is there a second?
Second.
Multiple seconds. I'll give it to Aravalo. Any further discussion, any edits? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And
I abstain. I was absent.
Right. And I believe Commissioner Yuko was as well. So with that, we will move on to our new business, which is the adoption of amendments to the Land Use Commission rules and procedures. This is an extensive document that was provided to everyone. I hope everyone had an opportunity to look through it. And at this point, I'll ask if there are any questions on it. And Commissioner Westerberg's hand went up first.
Okay. So on page 4, under section 3, other matters, it says the commission shall hear and decide or make recommendations on any other matters referred by the city council. Is that restricted in some way? Just out of curiosity. I mean, it just seems kind of vague.
Is the question, are referrals limited in any way?
Are the matters limited in any way? It just seems a little open-ended, so I was just curious. So anything the city council would refer to us, we would
Correct.
have to.
Correct,
All right.
yes.
I mean, obviously, if it doesn't fall within our purview, we can always push back on that, but they wouldn't want us
And
to.
that is also consistent with the Land Use Commission ordinance and city code as well.
Okay. Actually, you may want to address this as we go through this, but I think we should talk a little bit about the time limits and how those get established, and mostly how those get conveyed to people so that hopefully they're prepared when they come here.
That is one of the reasons that we're putting this all in here, so that basically we are giving if I remember correctly, and I don't have it directly in front of me right now because I didn't download that one document out of the 500 documents. Oh, there it is. Out of the 500 documents I have. The reason that we had approached it in this way was to give people a base level of time that they would know that they would be able to be heard, but then to grant permission for extensions beyond that time, but putting it in writing. Therefore, making sure that everybody understands before it comes to us, so we aren't arbitrarily deciding times once we're here. In terms of public commentary, public comments, obviously that is something that we can't really know. If I have 3 people show up, I'm not going to be real restrictive in time. If I have 103 people show up, we will be more restrictive in time, always giving priority to the people who live within the defined notification area, giving them priority in time, and lesser time to people who live outside of that. There's some ambiguity and interpretation to the rules. I've heard people say that we don't really have to take testimony from people outside of the defined area by our rules, but I feel we should hear everybody if they've come, just granting them an opportunity to say something minor, not monopolize the conversation.
Shouldn't the time allotment, though, be the same for both sides? Like tonight, it was 20 minutes and 10 minutes.
Tonight was a very unusual situation.
But it should be the same, shouldn't it?
Well, but normally we don't have 2 parties in this manner. Normally we have an applicant and we have the public.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
And
that's true.
There are some members of the public who feel that I should grant them the exact same amount of time. Obviously, that is impossible to do because, again, if you have 30 people, I can't give 20 minutes to 30 individuals. We do offer also the opportunity for people to submit written testimony, which we can get. We've also put in some timelines on when testimony is due for us to be able to read it. We had the case recently where we got a 70-page legal document literally at 11 o'clock the day of a hearing, and there's no way for us to really digest that and give it the time that is needed. So that's why we've put some of those conditions in as well. Just kind of trying to give everybody an equal opportunity to engage, but also make sure that we aren't being deluged with a bunch of stuff at the last minute because we don't have time to read a ton of comments.
I have a comment on that, if you allow. By the way, I will commend our chair that deals very well with all the hassle in the room. But I think that 2 things for me are important. First, kindly, like you almost every time do, kindly remind the public that if they have something to a kind of support previous people from the public, let's do that they just say, I'm saying the same. You do not take their words, you simply shorten their time. And the other thing, I personally, I have plenty of friends that are lawyers and counsels, but I don't think that they deserve more time. Last time, we granted a time for a lawyer that was like the whole time for the public. I think that...
And that's something we have to work with law and staff on doing, because one of my concerns is that we are becoming a very legal commission with attorneys appearing before us. None of us are attorneys, I don't think. Are you an attorney, John? Used to be. That doesn't count. The law's changed since then. And so for asking us to make legal determinations and judge on issues of due diligence and presentation of evidence and things like this just is not fair. None of us are equipped to do that. We are supposed to be quasi-judicial, and I have the fear that we're becoming more judicial.
Specifically, how can we eliminate this, what happened last time, of this attorney coming up and then calling people as witnesses to his presentation?
And that's something, like I said, that I have to coordinate with staff and law as to exactly how we handle that. Because obviously, any of those people can sue the city if they choose to. That's everybody's prerogative. And so how do we thread that needle of making sure someone feels that they've been heard, but not push them to the point where they feel that they actually have to take that extra step?
I think the issue is that when someone gives testimony, they're giving the testimony themselves, and they're not calling on other people to corroborate or dispute or whatever. You know, it's just an individual testimony.
If I may speak to that.
Sure.
The cross-examination portion of a public hearing is uncommon, but it is something that we do have to allow for. It's in most communities' rules, if it's a planning and zoning commission or a planning commission, ZBA, whatever the body's called. It's good that we have it in our rules so that there's some sort of framework for it. But that was the first time in my almost 10 years of experience where I've seen it done live, but it is a really unique circumstance. But the rules are supposed to kind of help provide a framework for it.
And that we can sort of cross-examine, we can follow up questions, but another presenter to another presenter, isn't that different?
They're entitled to do that as part of the hearing. Again, it's very unique. It was the first time I've seen it, and I've been doing this for almost a decade.
I've seen it a couple times here where an attorney basically cross-examines the person who's providing testimony. It's very rare, but it does happen on occasion, and we just kind of have to figure out how we handle that when it does happen. Like I said, that kind of caught me off guard, because I hadn't seen that happen in a while.
And I believe it's limited to certain objectors, right? So cross-examination is not like any member of the public that lives in the city of Evanston. It's an objector within so many feet based upon the application.
Right.
So in this particular situation, cross-examination should have happened November 30th, 2022, but did not because...
No, I'm sorry. We're talking about what happened last week.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you weren't here for that one. So we had an attorney who wished to cross-examine a person providing testimony who lived directly across the street from the site.
And that is,
right,
unfortunately, proper. You have to
Yeah.
let them do that.
Yeah.
I had another question on the continuance stuff.
Yep.
It says that we can do it and we vote, and that's the way we've been operating. But didn't this thing come around?
So here's where we're going on that one. We have an entire list of an omnibus referral that I made a couple weeks ago, I don't remember when, that's going to be coming to us. One of those changes is a request in the city code. We're asking city council to change city code so that it is consistent throughout, because my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, is code is not consistent throughout.
And the consistency would be that we can vote.
That we may, as opposed to shall, grant continuances, and that we would put conditions on it about, it would have to be, you are telling us exactly why you are seeking a continuance, and that is the matter that is being heard at the continuance. Did you want to add something, Ms. Glenn?
That is correct. Thank you, Chair Rogers. And that omnibus text amendment package is scheduled to come to the Land Use Commission on May 24th. So we hopefully will get this cleared up fairly quickly.
So even if we pass this tonight, we still have to operate under the shall, but rather than making the change on this a month later, we're kind of preempting it. Code still prevails on anything. If we make a rule that violates code, code still prevails.
So a question about the
Yep.
public comment time limits is, I guess this amended section 5 is the operative provision, right? And it provides for 10 minutes for community groups. There's no time limit for just general public comment. And I know as the chair, if you got 100 people, you're going to give people 30 seconds. If you got 2, you'll be more generous. But would it not be helpful to have the default be in the rules 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, with the chair being able to modify that based on the tenor of the meeting and the number of witnesses, et cetera? Because we've had some of these people get up there and you say 2 minutes, and they're going to, they're rambling for 5, 10, 15, and I'm just wondering, as a matter of codification, whether we should, you've got at least the basic.
Some of it is going to be, as chair, me taking a little more aggressive stand with some people.
But what John's suggesting, though, is that I think people need to know beforehand, before they get there and they've prepared this 10-minute speech, that they only really have 2 minutes as a standard. I don't know how it's
right,
stated.
so the default is, let's say, 2 or 3, but with
Right.
the discretion to increase it or decrease it based on the chair's discretion and how the meeting's unfolding and the number of witnesses, et cetera. Because right now it's open-ended and it's just unclear to the people coming how much time will I have. Unless that's in the notice, I don't know.
I think one of the problems is no matter how you provide the notice, you will have people who do not read that and who will come prepared to speak as long as they want. But I do think it makes sense to identify the time limit as much as we can and to try to hold to it.
If they didn't read it, that's their fault. At least now we have something that's in the rules that say.
I agree. In a similar vein, under Section 6, where we're talking about submittal of evidence, I know how hard this must be for staff to get all of that stuff out. First of all, the Friday before, then the stuff keeps dribbling in. We had one incident, and I believe it was the first meeting with the affordable housing development on Church Street, where we received, I think it was a 70-page
Right.
And 70-page summary. After 12 o'clock noon, I think it was like at 1 o'clock it came through, or maybe a little bit before. The same day. Now, the lawyer who prepared that then seemed irritated that not everyone had read it and wanted to cross-examine almost every commissioner to say, did you read it? Did you follow up? I understand they may be limited by time, but that's unreasonable. And I think we need to be able to set some standards as to what the commissioners can be expected to digest.
And that's why we're getting information earlier, so that the commissioners have an opportunity to read through things. We have, and remind me, staff, if you know it off the top of your head, but it's 5 days, 5 business days before the Land Use Commission meeting, so that it will be included in the packet as well.
Correct.
Anything received outside of the 5 business days will not be in the packet, and will not appear on the website.
Will not be distributed. Because I think it puts the onus on us. If we get it, it's like, oh, geez, we got to read it because.
I'm going to assume the city has to distribute it if it gets it, correct?
That is my understanding. If we were receiving, public comment ahead of the meeting, I think it is appropriate to distribute those ahead of the hearing.
But can we is there a way to identify either on the website or with the materials that people should understand something that comes in the day before may not be read?
And I do believe that is incorporated into these rules.
And I know that staff has alerted people. I know Ms. Asbal has alerted people directly that if you don't meet this deadline, there's a risk that your materials may not be read by the commission.
It is on page.
I was just going to do that, Katie. Thank you.
I've searched business days in the document. So submittal of evidence and petitions, any materials presented in the commission's packet, posted on the city website, shall be transmitted digitally to the secretary no less than 5 business days before the land use commission meeting where such material is discussed or considered. And then materials submitted less than 5 business days before the land use commission meeting where such material is discussed or considered shall be accepted but may not be posted to the city website in advance of the meeting's start time. So we have been, the past 2 meetings, kind of operating to get things up before the meeting, and I sent those to you right after I posted them on the website before noon on the day of the meeting. I think it's our intent to try to continue to do like a Monday and then a Wednesday follow-up as it comes. But to your point, I think that making sure that once these rules are adopted, we can then update the website appropriately. We did just create a new Google form for public comment where they sign up as an individual or as a group to try to create some more structure for this body. And we'll just have to kind of evaluate some better ways to communicate that to the public.
And if I can share, just to follow on the following page that Katie referenced, there is some additional kind of conversation about this. So this is page 13 of the track change version, where it does say that any comments received after 3 p.m. the day before the meeting may be distributed to the commission at the meeting. So.
I mean, people will submit things to us while we're here, and we just kind of have to deal with that and give it the weight that we can give it.
And I understand. And again, it's just that I think people should be aware that a late submittal does not guarantee it will be read. That's all.
Yep. Other issues, comments, questions? Like I said, I think we kind of highlighted at the very beginning the basics in the bullet points in the staff memo, removing the whole comment about the transitional membership since we are no longer a transitional board. We are an entirely comprised board. There was some issues with like having to stop hearing in order to take a vote to continue past 11 o'clock. As the chair, I will make a ruling. Anybody can question my ruling at any point. I'm not going to demand that we do things. If people have a question, feel free to chime in and say, I think we should continue with this, or I really think that this is going to take a lot longer. We already talked about the written comment distribution and turn-in times. One of the things we also clarified is the establishment of requirement for speakers on behalf of a group. We have had people who have said, hi, I'm representing the neighbors in my block, but I don't know if they're representing 2 people or 80 people or anything like that. So we've kind of put some restriction, or not restrictions, but some guidelines and guardrails on that. The clarifications on the continuance request we've already kind of talked about. There is some language discussing the difference between public testimony and public comment.
Where does it say? I was going to ask that. Where does it say that?
That is in what section?
Which portion?
The comment versus testimony.
Section 5 talks about, it just says testimony or comment, and when I read that, I thought, well, what's the difference?
So public comment is a derivative of the Open Meetings Act, right? As a public body, we have to allow for people to be able to address you as a public body under state law. So that's public comment.
Testimony?
Public testimony is specifically dealing with the application or the issue that's before the body that's going to be considered as quote-unquote evidence in your deliberations to whether something meets the standards or not.
Okay. So when we ask at the end if there's any other comments, that's comments, and then, okay, got it.
Right, because it doesn't relate to anything that's directly before us.
I mean, and it could, but it's not testimony.
It's not
right?
testimony, and it's not something that is part of the record for that particular case.
Got it.
Chair, if I could also, testimony is limited to those that are within the mailed noticing radius, so that is another distinction between comment and testimony.
Really?
Yes.
Defining a little more the beginning and ending of public hearing, I basically will have an extra little line of script that I have to read before and after to signify more clearly, this is now when we begin taking public testimony, this is when public testimony has ended. Just so everybody understands, we're hoping that will clear up some of this as we're having our deliberation, people raising their hands and jumping up and wanting to talk and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And just being able to say, nope, that opportunity is gone. We did leave a condition in there, if I remember correctly, so that we can ask clarifying questions of staff if we need to, but it's not eliciting new testimony. It is merely a question of clarification. If we do want to take additional testimony, then we have to reopen the record on a vote. That will then reopen the testimony. Then do we have to do that on a vote? How did we decide on that? I think we left it at the discretion of the chair, so we didn't have to just keep taking vote after vote after vote. Obviously, again, any decision of the chair can be appealed by any member of the body. Finally, then, just working some more with the consistency to make sure that state law, city code, and our rules are consistent across the board in terms of terminology, in terms of enforcement rules, that sort of stuff. Any other questions on the rules? If not, is there a motion to adopt our new rules as presented?
I'll move to adopt our new rules as presented.
Been moved by Westerberg. Is there a second?
I'd like to offer an amendment.
Okay, we'll get to that.
After this is seconded.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Halleck, yes.
I'd like to offer to amend the motion on the floor, and that is to provide some sort of time limitation in Section 5 for public comment.
So there's an amendment. Is that seconded?
As the default provision, with the chair having the option to use his or her discretion.
So there is an amendment moved by Huco, seconded by Halleck. All those in favor of the amendment? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now back to the main motion for approval of the minutes with that amendment, or I'm sorry, of the rules with that amendment. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. With 6 votes, the motion carries, and our rules are adopted. Continuing on with our agenda, we now move to, let me see, I've got too many tabs open here. Communications, is there anything staff would like to communicate to us?
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you. I will call for public comment, but note that the room is empty except for staff and the commissioners. Therefore, I will ask if there is a motion to adjourn.
Did we do the draft minutes?
Yes, we did.
Why?
We did those right after we got back.
Okay.
While you were in the bathroom.
No, I think you were back. I think you were back because we did it. So is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Moved by Halleck. Is there a second? Second by Westerberg. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We do stand adjourned until May 10th. We actually have a Wednesday off. So enjoy it. Some of us have a condo meeting that night.